Persona 5 Strikers is a collaboration between P Studios, the team behind the core Persona games, and Omega Force, who are best known for their endless array of Warriors games. Like most of Omega Force's games, Strikers is a Musou, but Strikers is so much more than your standard Musou. Strikers masterfully mimics the visual style of Persona 5 and does a commendable job of infusing many mechanics from the mainline Persona games into an entirely different genre of game. I absolutely love the Persona franchise, so I was always going to play this game, mostly out of curiosity about the story. But not being a huge Musou fan, I wasn't expecting to love this game as much as I did. I had an absolute blast with Strikers. If, like me, you're a fan of Persona, but not huge on Musous in general, I'd still urge you to give Strikers a shot. I've dabbled in quite a few Musous over the years, and I can count on one hand the Musous that I've actually enjoyed, so it really says something about Strikers that it resonated so strongly with me. If you're a Persona 5 fan, I think there will be enough of that game's DNA in Strikers to pull you through. The first thing you'll likely notice upon starting Strikers is just how perfectly it captures Persona 5's striking art style, no pun intended, keeping all of its iconic visual flair intact. It flawlessly mirrors everything from the look and animation of the characters, to the way the environments feel to wander around, to the gorgeous anime cutscenes. Strikers even kicks off with a super stylish cinematic in the vein of the mainline Persona games. If you were just looking at a screenshot of Strikers, you could easily mistake it for Persona 5, which is certainly high praise. Strikers picks up 6 months after the end of Persona 5 and sees the cast reunited for the first time since the end of that game. When a new app called Emma appears that can be used to steal people's desires, turning them into mindless drones, it's up to the Phantom Thieves to change the hearts of a whole host of new wrongdoers. This sends the crew on a road trip spanning Japan that sees them visiting some familiar locations as well as a plethora of new places. Strikers is far more story-driven than any other Musou I've ever played. In fact, there's an almost staggering amount of story in the game, which I couldn't be happier about. Because ultimately, what I wanted most out of Strikers was to see the Phantom Thieves go on more exciting adventures together, and Strikers delivered this in spades. Overall, I was very satisfied with the story in Strikers. It feels like a natural continuation of Persona 5, and while it might not be quite as impactful as Persona 5, it's certainly a fun ride with a lot of exciting twists and turns. Obviously, as this is a direct sequel to Persona 5, you shouldn't play this until you've finished Persona 5 or Royal. Persona 5's greatest strength was its well-written and endearing cast of characters, so it genuinely felt great to see them again. While Strikers is far more action-oriented than the mainline Persona games, there's still a surprising amount of downtime spent just talking to your fellow Phantom Thieves, which I loved. I was worried that these smaller moments could get lost in a more action-heavy game, which would be a shame because the character interactions are a huge part of what makes Persona so special. The character dynamics and the banter back and forth remain as charming as ever, and the story offers further character development for practically every cast member. There were 2 characters in particular that Strikers gave me an entirely new appreciation for. Those characters being Yusuke and Haru, who were previously my 2 least favourite Phantom Thieves. Yusuke was always the character I was the least invested in, and I was less attached to Haru than the other cast members, as she was introduced relatively late in the story, which meant you didn't spend quite as much time with her as you did with many of the other Phantom Thieves. However, in Strikers, I felt like both Haru and Yusuke had some of the strongest story beats in the game, and Haru's personality shone through a lot more for me here than it did in Persona 5. In fact, she had multiple lines of dialogue throughout the game that actually made me laugh out loud. It's not only returning cast members that get standout moments in Strikers though. Persona 5 Strikers also expands the cast with 2 worthwhile new additions. Zenkichi, a detective who the Phantom Thieves are reluctantly forced to work with, and Sophia, an AI who the team meet inside the metaverse. Watching the story of these 2 characters unfold was one of my favourite parts of Strikers. Their stories both provide an interesting element of mystery to Strikers, and while I was initially sceptical of how interested I'd be in these new cast members, I quickly found myself deeply invested in both of their character arcs, as I was enamoured with both their backstories and their ongoing internal struggles that unravelled over the course of Strikers. Zenkichi in particular has become maybe one of my favourite characters in the entire Persona universe. It's worth noting that a large part of what made the cast so likeable the first time around was the excellent voice acting, and Strikers is no different. The performances remain great all around. Just like Persona 5, your time is divided between the real world and the metaverse. When you're in the real world, Strikers plays somewhat similarly to Persona 5. You'll spend this time having conversations with friends, exploring new towns, shopping for items and gear, and cooking meals that can be eaten in the metaverse for health and other buffs. There are, however, a couple of major differences between Strikers and Persona 5's overworlds. Strikers is significantly more linear, and it doesn't feature the social link system, which is one of the most crucial aspects of the mainline Persona games. Though the absence of social links does make a lot of sense, as their main purpose is to get to know the cast of characters and deepen your bonds with them. And seeing as this takes place after Persona 5, the protagonist already knows the entire cast extremely well. While there's no social link mechanic in the game, Strikers does have its own spin on the idea in the form of your bond level. This represents the overarching bond between the Phantom Thieves. There are many ways to increase your bond level, including helping your teammates when they come to you with requests, cooking new meals for the team, or simply by battling enemies. Leveling up your bond level rewards you with points that can be invested in a skill tree for various perks. I really liked the variety of towns you get to explore in Persona 5 Strikers, and I was consistently excited to see what would come next. However, one little gripe I have with the game is the amount of reused voiceover that the shopkeepers have. The fact that this game sees the Phantom Thieves travelling all across Japan makes this stand out even more, as it quickly becomes noticeable that you're seemingly being served by the exact same people all across the country. A mechanic I really enjoyed in Strikers is the investigation system. At certain points in the story, you'll roam around town talking to some NPCs and eavesdropping on others to gather information on potential villains known as monarchs who are stealing hearts, with your goal being to get a keyword that the Phantom Thieves can input into Emma to enter the person's jail, which is Strikers' equivalent to Persona 5's palaces. Investigations are a creative way to offer exposition and added world building without having to beat you over the head with additional cutscenes. Upon entering the metaverse, you'll be exploring jails. While these are ultimately Strikers' answer to Persona 5's palaces, there's some huge differences between the two. The biggest difference being the combat within the jails. Strikers ditches the turn-based combat of Persona 5 in favour of Musou hack-and-slash action, though Strikers still manages to incorporate a shocking amount of Persona mechanics into these battles. These mechanics, like summoning personas with different type advantages, sneak attacks, and all-out attacks on downed enemies, allow Strikers to have a bit more depth than your average Musou. Overall, my biggest surprise with Strikers is just how much I liked the combat. I generally get bored with this style of gameplay very quickly, but Strikers had just enough depth to keep me engaged all the way through. That's not to say that Strikers won't eventually get stale. Due to the relative simplicity of the genre, I think all Warriors-style games eventually get tedious, but I was well into the post-game content before I started to feel a little fatigued with Strikers' combat, which is impressive. It's not just the new iterations of Persona mechanics that keep Strikers fresh throughout, there's also a lot of new mechanics that allow you to mix up your strategy in combat. As you're fighting, you slowly fill your showtime gauge. When it's full, you can unleash your ultimate attack. Every character has their own unique ultimate attack, and they're always incredibly flashy attacks that deal a devastating amount of damage to a wide area of enemies. Strikers also offers a large variety of objects in the world that can be used for contextual environmental attacks, like poles and posts that you can spin around, chandeliers that can be dropped on enemies, and even skateboards and snowboards to be ridden through the hordes. The skateboards and snowboards are by far the most interesting. Using them to plough your way through waves of enemies is incredibly satisfying. The main reason Strikers kept me engaged for so long was thanks to it letting you play as all the members of the Phantom Thieves, so when I started to get burnt out playing as someone, I'd simply switch them out of the party for someone else. Strikers makes this very easy, as you can reorganise your party at any checkpoint within a jail. Each of the Phantom Thieves plays drastically differently, with their own unique movesets. They even have a series of master skills that are unlocked simply by playing as them. The best part of this is that all of the Phantom Thieves are playable from the jump. You don't have to go through some slow rigmarole of unlocking them all, so you can just start experimenting with different characters immediately to figure out who you enjoy playing as. I found Joker, Arn, Haru and Sophie to be the team I was most drawn back to using, as their skill sets seemed to give me a nice balance of everything I needed to succeed in most fights, though I was pleasantly surprised to find that I enjoyed playing as pretty much everyone. While 95% of your time in jails is spent fighting, there are some light stealth and platforming elements sprinkled in. While these sections are very simple, they still served as a much appreciated way to break up the near constant battles. There is another way that Strikers occasionally tries to add some extra spice to jails, and that's through puzzles. These puzzles are undeniably the weakest aspect of Strikers though. They're always very simplistic, and they usually involve some boring busy work like pushing blocks around or activating generators. Like Persona 5's palaces, Strikers' jails do a nice job of mixing things up to offer a lot of visual variety. Throughout the story, you'll visit everything from castles to a city entirely encased in ice. I found all of these environments interesting and enjoyable to explore, with one exception. Eventually, you'll come across one jail that you can't just navigate like normal, as it's filled with points that'll teleport you to a different area of the map. While I appreciate that they were going for something different with this jail, I ultimately just found it tedious to progress through. Which is a shame, because this jail ironically included some of my favourite story beats in Strikers, and concludes with an absolutely awesome boss battle that was amongst the most memorable fights in the game. Another system that carries over from the mainline Persona games is fusing personas. This mechanic works almost identically to the core games. As you fight your way through jails, you'll be obtaining new personas to use in battle, with each of these personas having their own unique strengths and weaknesses. You'll then be able to visit the Velvet Room to fuse these personas together to create new, more powerful personas. If you're familiar with the Persona series, there's plenty of familiar personas to collect on your quest for a complete Persona compendium. While Strikers is certainly nowhere near as long as Persona 5, it's still a meaty game, clocking in at around 45 to 50 hours to see everything. Strikers has a lot of optional content to keep you playing long after the credits roll. Requests serve as Strikers' side missions. These requests range from defeating powerful enemies, to sneaking from one point of a jail to another without being seen, to fusing a specific persona with a specific ability. Occasionally, a phantom thief will contact you asking for help with something. I'd highly recommend that you do all of your team's requests as they pop up. Not only because these requests are actually missable if you don't accept them at the time, but also because you're often rewarded with some very fun character interactions for completing them. If you're looking for a challenge, you can take on Strikers' dire shadows. There's one of these enemies in every jail, and they present the most challenging battles in all of Strikers, so I definitely wouldn't recommend taking them on until quite late in the game. These fights are all worth completing though, as they provide some of Strikers' most engaging battles, as you really need to be paying attention to type advantages and going in with the right lineup of party members if you want to succeed. The Persona franchise has always been known for its remarkable soundtracks, so it's not surprising that Strikers' soundtrack is very good, but it cannot be overstated just how incredible the music in this game is. Even among the Persona franchise's stellar lineup of soundtracks, this one stands out. Strikers offers a good variety of both new songs and remixes of songs from Persona 5. The new version of Last Surprise in particular is phenomenal, and might be my new favourite song in the entire franchise. I have one gripe with Persona 5 Strikers that might seem silly, but it bothered me, and I know there are plenty of others who it'll irritate as well. And that's that Persona 5 Strikers has a pretty bad trophy list. I know that trophies don't matter to a lot of people, but to the people like myself who do care about them, they care a lot. Strikers' trophy list forces you to grind a lot for the platinum. I'm at the point where I've done everything in the game, so now I'm just forced to do the same missions again and again for hours, grinding for XP if I want the platinum. The trophy for unlocking all bond skills just seems poorly thought out. Either the requirements for this trophy should have been lowered, or the amount of XP gained for beating enemies should have been increased, so that you'd have all these skills by the time you've 100%ed the game. I'm genuinely shocked by how much I loved Strikers. Persona 5 is one of the greatest RPGs ever made, and this game is a worthy follow-up. Strikers recaptures the charm of Persona 5's cast perfectly, manages to offer presentation every bit as slick and stylish as Persona 5, and successfully translates the Persona franchise into an entirely new genre. This is easily the best Musou game I've ever played. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this review, make sure to like, subscribe, or leave a comment. You can also find me on Twitter @ChrisFremo, and stay tuned for more videos including my upcoming reviews of Outriders and Oddworld Soulstorm.